Hi, I'm Brent Russell, and welcome to It's Biblical. Today we're going to be talking about a prophet named Elijah from the Old Testament. This Bible is not actually just one book. It's actually a collection of 66 books written by 40 different authors over a period of 1,600 years. The first half of this Bible is called the Old Testament, and the second half of it is called the New Testament. Well, today we're going to be reading a story out of the Old Testament, out of 1 Kings chapter 17. And it's a story about a prophet named Elijah, and it's also a story about a ruthless king. And before we get into this story, I need to back up into chapter 16 a little bit to bring you up to speed where we're at. Now, you see, there was this ruthless, evil, terrible king named Ahab. And the Bible says that Ahab was the most evil of all kings. Now, kings back then were pretty well known for being evil and mean, but when the Bible says that you are the most evil of all kings, man, that's pretty bad. So it's fair to say that God was not happy with King Ahab. You see, King Ahab had built an altar to Baal, and Baal is the prince of Satan. Yeah, it's easy to say that God was not happy with Ahab. And because of that, God had told the prophet Elijah to deliver a message to Ahab. It was not a good message, but when God tells you to do something, you do it. So Elijah went to see Ahab, and we're going to take a look at that right now in 1 Kings chapter 7, verse 1. And the Bible says, "Now Elijah said to Ahab, 'As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years, except at my word.'" Oh, well, that's not very good news for a king to hear that he is about to go through a drought for the next few years. And you remember me telling you that Ahab was a very evil king. So right after Elijah gave him this message, God told Elijah, "You better run. As a matter of fact, you better go hide in a ravine on the other side of the Jordan River," which was probably a good idea. Well, Elijah got to this ravine, and he hid out down there, and there was a little bit of water running through a stream. So he had some water, but he didn't have any food. However, Elijah, being a man of God, knew that God has the power to provide. But how did God take care of him out in the middle of a desert? Well, let's take a look at what the Bible says. 1 Kings 17, verse 6. It says, "The ravens brought him food, bread, and meat in the mornings, and bread and meat in the evenings, and he drank from the brook." So Elijah had water down in the brook, and then God sent birds, these big, black, ugly raven birds, every day to bring him bread and meat. Well, because there was a drought in the whole land, it didn't just affect the king, of course. It affected everyone, even Elijah. And eventually that creek that he was at, it ran out of water down in that ravine. So God told Elijah that he needs to go to a city named Zarephath. Well, when Elijah got to this city, he was thirsty. I mean, he was parched. He had been without water for a while, and he finally came to the town where the well was, and he saw a widow collecting sticks. And he says to this widow, he says, to get me some water and also bring me a piece of bread. Well, the widow says to him, well, let's take a look at what the Bible says that the widow said. Now we're going to be reading out of verse 12. It says, the widow said, "As surely as the Lord your God lives," she replies, "I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little bit of olive oil in a jug. I am gathering these few sticks to take home and to make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat and die." So what she's saying here is that she has a little jar with some flour in it, and she has another little jar with some olive oil in it. And she says that she's gathering some sticks there so that she can go back home and make a little fire, and she has just enough flour and oil to mix together and make one more little piece of bread. And if you remember last week, we talked about how the bread back then was nothing like the bread that we have today. They're not loaves of bread, but rather they're like these little round little cracker or little tortilla looking pieces of bread. And so she had just enough flour and oil to make one more little piece, and she was gathering some sticks to go back and build the fire to cook that. Then she was going to feed that to her son and to herself, and then they were going to lay down and die. Pretty tragic, huh? I mean, man, that's a tough life. She was so poor and so hungry that she was about to make her last little piece of bread and lay down and die. But Elijah, now, he's got faith in God. And he could have felt sorry for the lady and let her go home and eat that last little piece of bread and die and not want to eat her food. But Elijah has faith in God. He knew that God would take care of them. So he tells the lady to go home and feed her son and herself, but first to make him a piece of bread. We're going to read now out of verse 15. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family, for the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. So just like Elijah said, you see, Elijah had told her to go home and make some bread for him first, then for her and her son. And if she did that, that God would take care of them and she won't run out of flour or oil. Well, she had faith. She listened to Elijah. She did what he said. She went home. She took the little bit of flour and the little bit of oil she had, and she mixed it together, and she made a little piece of bread, and she gave it to Elijah. Then he said, well, go ahead, make some for you and your son. So she took the little jar that she thought must be empty by now, because she knew there was only enough left to make one little last piece of bread. She took that jar, and she pours it out, and there was some more flour in it. And she poured out the oil, and there's some more oil in there, enough to make another piece of bread. So she gave that to her son. Then she did it again. She took the jar and she poured it out, and there was some more flour in it. And there's more oil, and she made herself a piece of bread. And the Bible says that she did this every day until the rains came. Yes, God definitely has the power to provide. We need to get in the habit of going to God for what we need. It's like our bottom line says, ask God for what you need to lend a hand. You know, last week we heard the story about a little boy that just had a sack lunch, and that's all he had, and he lended it a hand by giving that to Jesus, and then Jesus fed over 5,000 people with it. Today, God is using what this little widow had. She had just a little bit of flour and a little bit of oil, but she had faith, and now he's using this to feed her and her family and Elijah for years. It was a true miracle. If God can provide for a widow who's about to starve to death and be able to provide for her, her son, and Elijah, he can certainly provide for us when we need. We need to have faith and ask God when we need something. We can trust God no matter what. It's biblical. Thank you for listening, and God bless.